Emily Grace Carter grew up in Pine Creek, North Carolina, a charming small town with quiet streets, cozy homes, and a deep sense of community. The town, surrounded by dense forests and gentle hills, thrived on its simple, close-knit values. Emily, the eldest daughter of James and Mary Carter, was known for her compassionate nature and unwavering determination. Her childhood was happy but far from carefree. Tragedy struck when Emily was 15, and her mother passed away after a sudden illness. This loss left a profound void in her family. Her father, James, took on extra shifts at the local factory to provide for the family, leaving Emily to care for her younger sister, Jenny. At just 15, Emily became a stand-in mother, balancing school, chores, and emotional support for Jenny. By the time she graduated high school, Emily had not only excelled academically but also become a star athlete on the track team. Her hard work earned her an athletic scholarship to a state university, a rare opportunity for someone from Pine Creek. Yet, her accomplishments were bittersweet. Emily hesitated to leave for college, worrying about Jenny's well-being and her father's struggles. Despite her fears, she hoped that her nursing degree would eventually create a better life for all of them. Beneath her composed exterior, Emily carried heavy burdens. She often stayed up late after finishing her shifts at Joe's Diner, staring at her textbooks and trying to focus. Her days were a cycle of work, studies, and managing Jenny's rebellious behavior. She wrote about her struggles in her diary, where she poured out her frustrations and fears. Emily longed for freedom from her endless responsibilities but felt guilty for even entertaining the thought. Her social life was nearly non-existent, and she turned down invitations from friends to parties or gatherings. Even her dreams of going to college seemed like a distant fantasy at times, as the weight of her responsibilities consumed her. Her sense of isolation grew when she began noticing changes in Jenny's behavior. Once a lively and curious teenager, Jenny had started skipping school and becoming secretive. Emily suspected her sister might be getting involved with the wrong crowd, but didn't know how to confront her without pushing her further away. Sheriff Tom Mitchell was a towering figure in Pine Creek, both literally and figuratively. A seasoned lawman, he was known for his charisma and dedication to keeping the town safe. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a darker, controlling side. Emily's first encounter with Mitchell came in the summer of 2023 when he visited Joe's Diner to inform her of a troubling matter. He claimed to have evidence that Jenny was associating with known drug dealers and warned Emily to keep a closer eye on her sister. Initially, Emily was grateful for the heads up and promised to take action, but the sheriff's interest in Emily didn't end there. He began showing up more frequently, often under the pretense of checking on Jenny's situation. His tone grew less professional and more personal, subtly suggesting that he could help her family out of their troubles, but not without something in return. Sheriff Tom Mitchell's initial involvement in Emily's life seemed well-intentioned, as he warned her about Jenny's risky behavior and claimed he was only looking out for her family. However, his visits to Joe's Diner became increasingly frequent, and his demeanor shifted from friendly to unnervingly familiar. Mitchell began offering unsolicited advice, subtly making Emily feel indebted to him. One day, he revealed that he had evidence of Jenny buying drugs from a known dealer, a video and a series of photos that could easily ruin her reputation and lead to serious legal trouble. Mitchell presented this information not as a warning but as leverage. He made it clear, unless Emily complied with his demands, he would expose Jenny's actions to the authorities. At first, the sheriff's request seemed innocent enough, such as meeting to discuss solutions for Jenny's issues, but these meetings quickly turned into isolated encounters in private locations, like his remote hunting cabin. There, Mitchell's true nature surfaced. He began exerting more control over Emily, insisting she keep their interaction secret. He preyed on her vulnerability, using guilt and fear to ensure her compliance. As his manipulation deepened, Mitchell would often remind Emily of her precarious situation. He framed himself as her only lifeline, suggesting that resisting him would mean losing not only her sister, but also her reputation, her scholarship, and her dreams. Emily felt trapped, unable to break free from his grasp while carrying the weight of her sister's troubles and her own silence. Jenny Carter's addiction had started as a coping mechanism after their mother's death. Struggling to process her grief and feeling neglected, she began using prescription painkillers offered by friends. What started as casual experimentation quickly spiraled into dependence as Jenny sought stronger substances like oxycodone and later heroin. Emily noticed the warning signs early on: Jenny's erratic mood swings, missing money, and failing grades, but her efforts to intervene were often met with resistance. Jenny became secretive, sneaking out at night and associating with older, dangerous individuals in the town's underbelly. Emily sought help through local support groups and even saved money to enroll Jenny in counseling, but the results were short-lived. Sheriff Mitchell exploited Jenny's addiction to tighten his control over Emily. He frequently reminded her of the photos and videos he possessed, as well as his knowledge of Jenny's ties to local dealers. He insinuated that he was protecting Jenny from far worse consequences, painting himself as a savior while ensuring Emily remained under his thumb. Mitchell's manipulation left Emily feeling increasingly powerless. Her attempts to shield Jenny from harm often backfired, as Mitchell used each incident to draw her deeper into his web of control. Despite her desperation to save her sister, Emily found herself sacrificing her own safety and dignity in the process. The discovery that Emily was pregnant marked a tragic turning point in her already strained life. It wasn't just any pregnancy, it was the result of months of manipulation and coercion at the hands of Sheriff Tom Mitchell. Emily had been wrestling with the consequences of his increasing control over her life, but the news that she was carrying his child brought everything into sharp, painful focus. The weight of the situation bore down on her as she tried to grapple with the profound emotions swirling within her: shame, guilt, fear, and anger. She knew that telling Mitchell about the pregnancy would be a monumental moment, and she feared his response. She had been quietly considering her options: abortion, adoption, or keeping the baby, but none of these choices seemed like true options. Each one carried its own set of emotional burdens. The idea of terminating the pregnancy felt like an unbearable loss, yet the thought of carrying a child that belonged to the man who had manipulated her into this position was equally horrifying. Emily began researching her options, trying to understand what her rights were, what the consequences might be, but she felt increasingly isolated in her decision-making process. When she finally gathered the courage to tell Mitchell, his response was cold and calculating. He showed little concern for her emotional state, focusing only on the child's future. His primary concern was to preserve his reputation and power, and he immediately suggested she terminate the pregnancy, offering to fund the procedure. Mitchell's suggestion wasn't made out of care for Emily, but to avoid the fallout of a public scandal that a child from this illicit affair would bring. He reminded Emily that she owed him, that he had saved her sister Jenny from arrest, and that she should be grateful for his protection. Emily, horrified, refused to even consider the termination. Her refusal ignited a fire of anger in Mitchell, who warned her of the consequences of going public with her pregnancy. His threats grew more aggressive, insinuating that he would ruin both her and Jenny's lives if she didn't comply. Emily realized that her fear of him was growing, and the prospect of not only losing control of her life but also her sister's future seemed like an insurmountable burden. Emily eventually made the difficult decision to go through with the pregnancy, but she also vowed to keep it a secret for as long as possible. She knew that Mitchell would be furious if he found out she was planning to keep the child, but her sense of right and wrong, and her growing attachment to the unborn baby, ultimately led her down this path. She started looking for ways to raise the baby without anyone finding out who the father was, considering adoption or other arrangements, but all of those choices felt like compromises on her integrity. Karen Mitchell, the wife of Sheriff Tom Mitchell, had always been somewhat removed from the day-to-day running of her husband's affairs. Her life had largely revolved around social events, charity work, and maintaining the perfect image of a sheriff's wife. But behind the facade of their seemingly ideal marriage, Karen knew there were cracks in her husband's character. She had long suspected that Tom had affairs with other women, but she refused to face the reality of his behavior, focusing instead on her community duties and children. However, everything changed when Karen received an anonymous letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, without a return address, and its contents contained shocking revelations. The letter detailed Tom's sexual abuse of Emily Carter, his control over her sister Jenny, and the extent to which he had manipulated both women for months. Karen felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. She couldn't believe the words she was reading. Her husband, the man she trusted and admired, had been abusing his power in ways that were beyond her comprehension. The letter also included photographs of Emily and Tom in compromising situations, as well as evidence of his role in orchestrating Jenny's ongoing drug addiction. At first, Karen was in denial, unsure whether to believe what she was reading. She couldn't imagine her husband, whom she had known for over 2 decades, could be capable of such vile behavior, but her suspicion slowly morphed into a desperate need for answers. She hired a private investigator to look into the allegations, quietly following leads without involving Tom, who was becoming more erratic in his behavior. The investigator soon uncovered an even darker side to Tom's actions. He was not only manipulating Emily and Jenny, but he had also been using his position as sheriff to cover cover up his tracks and silence anyone who threatened to expose him. The investigator provided Karen with hard evidence, photos, witness testimonies, and accounts from other women who had been targeted by Tom. The realization hit Karen like a ton of bricks, and she found herself caught in a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of humiliation. She now knew that her entire marriage had been built on lies. Karen was faced with an agonizing decision. Should she confront Tom and risk everything she had built with him? Should she expose him, knowing the devastating impact it would have on their family and the town? As she sat with the evidence, she realized that she had to take action. Tom's reign of terror needed to end, and Emily's story needed to be heard. The tragic end of Emily Carter's life came swiftly and violently, leaving the small town of Pine Creek in shock. The emotional intensity surrounding Emily's pregnancy and the web of manipulation by Sheriff Tom Mitchell had created a volatile and dangerous situation. The truth of her ordeal had been building in the background, and the final confrontation, unexpected and catastrophic, was the culmination of months of fear, secrecy, and lies. The moment Karen Mitchell, Tom's wife, discovered the truth about her husband's abuse and manipulation of Emily, her world came crashing down. Karen had always been a dutiful wife, maintaining the image of a perfect family and community figure, but the revelation that her husband had fathered Emily's child, abused his power, and manipulated both Emily and Jenny for his own selfish gain shattered Karen's view of everything she had built. The anger and humiliation that flooded her consciousness clouded her judgment. Karen's emotional turmoil, combined with the overwhelming sense of betrayal, led her down a dark and irreversible path. She confronted Emily at her home, demanding answers about her involvement with Tom, her pregnancy, and the impact it would have on their family. Karen's emotional state was already frayed. Her anger had been building, but the weight of the revelation that her husband had exploited Emily in such a horrific manner pushed her to the edge. The conversation quickly escalated into a confrontation, with both women exchanging words full of hurt, betrayal, and resentment. Emily, in the middle of all the chaos, tried to explain the manipulation she had endured, but Karen couldn't hear her. She saw Emily not as a victim, but as the person who had destroyed her family. In the heat of the moment, Karen's anger overwhelmed her. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the coffee table, a physical representation of the fragile piece in her life, and struck Emily on the head with it. The impact was devastating. Emily collapsed to the ground, blood spilling from her wound. For a moment, there was silence, a horrifying realization dawning upon Karen as she stood over Emily's motionless body. In a panic, Karen checked for signs of life but found none. The realization that she had just killed Emily, albeit in a fit of uncontrollable rage, left her paralyzed with fear. She had just committed an unthinkable act. In a frantic attempt to cover up the crime, Karen quickly staged the scene to make it look like an accident. She moved Emily's body to a different part of the house, attempting to make it appear as though Emily had slipped and fallen. She carefully wiped down surfaces, removed any trace of her presence from the scene, and destroyed the vase. Her goal was clear: protect her family and ensure that her husband's crimes remained hidden, no matter the cost. But as she returned to her usual routines, trying to maintain an air of normalcy in front of the community, the weight of her actions lingered. She couldn't escape the horror of what she had done to Emily. The tragic end of Emily's life marked the beginning of a new chapter for Karen, a chapter full of guilt, paranoia, and the growing certainty that the truth would eventually come to light. The aftermath of Emily's death rocked the town of Pine Creek to its core. Emily's disappearance was initially met with confusion and concern, but as time passed, the investigation into her death began to unravel the dark secrets of the Mitchell family. What had initially seemed like a tragic accident soon took a darker turn as the authorities began to question the circumstances surrounding her death. The local police, already under the influence of Sheriff Tom Mitchell, initially handled the case with a sense of complacency. However, as Emily's family and a few concerned townspeople began to push for answers, the investigation grew more intense. Emily's father, a man devastated by the loss of his daughter, began looking into her life with fresh eyes. He uncovered records of the tension between Emily and Tom, discovering notes and letters that painted a disturbing picture of Tom's control over her. Meanwhile, the private investigator that Karen Mitchell had hired earlier, who had been investigating Tom's abuses, began to piece together the full scope of the sheriff's actions. The investigator had already uncovered evidence of Tom's coercion and manipulation, and when he learned of Emily's death, he couldn't stay silent. The investigator passed along the information to the authorities, detailing the evidence of Tom's abuse, Emily's pregnancy, and Karen's role in trying to keep the situation under wraps. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place quickly. Authorities began to re-examine the scene of Emily's death, and the autopsy report confirmed that the blow to her head was not accidental. It was blunt force trauma, a violent and purposeful strike. The timeline of events, combined with witness testimonies and Emily's personal journals, pointed directly to Karen Mitchell. She was arrested and charged with second-degree murder for her role in Emily's death. Tom Mitchell's involvement in Emily's manipulation and his abuse of his power as sheriff were also exposed in the investigation. He was charged with a range of crimes, from sexual assault and coercion to the abuse of his position in law enforcement to cover up his actions. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town, where many had trusted Tom for years. His reputation as a respected public figure and pillar of the community had been nothing but a facade to mask his criminal behavior. As the trial proceeded, Karen Mitchell stood trial for her crime, facing public scorn and intense scrutiny. Tom, facing charges as well, was forced to step down from his position as sheriff. Though Tom tried to manipulate the proceedings in his favor, his guilty conscience and mounting evidence led him to strike a plea deal. His sentencing was lenient. He received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation with investigators. He would spend 5 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was far too light for the crimes he had committed. The community of Pine Creek was left reeling from the revelations. Many people had once looked up to Tom and trusted him to uphold the law, but the truth of his abuse and manipulation shattered that trust completely. Emily's family, particularly her father and her younger sister Jenny, were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. Jenny, who had been struggling with her own addiction, found herself without the support of her sister, and the weight of everything that had happened began to take a toll on her as well. Though the Mitchells' crimes were exposed, the damage had been done. The small town was never the same, and the scars left by Emily's tragic death would endure long after the trials had ended. Emily's death, though tragic, sparked a wave of change in Pine Creek and beyond. The town, once proud of its tight-knit community and strong moral fabric, was forced to confront the reality of systemic abuse and corruption. The revelations surrounding Sheriff Tom Mitchell's abuse of power, his sexual exploitation of Emily, and his coercion of both Emily and Jenny brought to light the deep-seated issues of control and manipulation within the local law enforcement system. In the wake of these revelations, Emily's family became advocates for justice and reform. Her father, who had always been a quiet and reserved man, found himself thrust into the spotlight as he fought to ensure his daughter's story was heard. He worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the dangers of power imbalances, especially when it came to those in positions of authority. The family began speaking at local forums, sharing their experiences and encouraging others to come forward with their own stories of abuse and manipulation. Emily's death was no longer a private tragedy. It became a public symbol of the need for change. To honor Emily's memory and ensure that her legacy lived on, her family established the Emily Carter Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of abuse and advocating for criminal justice reform. The foundation provided resources to women and children who had been victims of abuse, offering counseling, legal assistance, and support for those looking to escape abusive situations. The organization also worked to educate the public about the importance of holding those in power accountable, regardless of their position in society. The town of Pine Creek, though still recovering from the events, began to implement systemic changes in the way it handled abuse cases. A new sheriff was elected, someone with a commitment to transparency, fairness, and integrity. The town also introduced new protocols for reporting abuse within law enforcement, ensuring that no one would ever again be able to manipulate their position for personal gain without facing the consequences. Emily's voice, once silenced by the violence of her death, was now being heard through the work of her family and the organizations they established. The conversation about abuse, power dynamics, and accountability spread beyond Pine Creek, inspiring other communities to examine their own systems of justice and the ways in which abuse of power could be eradicated. Though Emily's life was tragically cut short, her legacy lived on in the lasting reforms that followed. The legacy of one woman's courage, the power of her family's resolve, and the collective determination to bring about justice transformed the town and left a permanent mark on the broader fight for reform and accountability. Emily's death would never be forgotten, and her legacy would continue to inspire those who were fighting for a more just world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Also, tap the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. Your support means a lot to us. See you in the next one.